Welcome. Are you ready to step into the unknown? Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from right now. Put on your headphones, kill the lights, take a slow, deep breath, because what happens on Brazilian highways doesn't always have a rational explanation. And this is one of those things. Some trips never leave you. It doesn't matter how many years roll by, how many more miles you clock after the fact. That one journey stays burned into your memory like a scar that never fully heals. You wake up at 3 a.m. and it's there. You take a curve on an ordinary Tuesday and it all floods back. That specific moment, that specific night. Before we go any further, if this story is already gripping you, hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to me. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what comes next in this video will send chills straight down your spine. Now, let's keep going. My name is Roberto. I'm 45 years old, and I've been driving long-haul buses for 2 decades. Every route in this country, I've done it, from the deep south of Rio Grande do Sul all the way up to the Amazon basin, from São Paulo, cutting across the entire northeast. I've seen things out on those roads that most people wouldn't believe. Storms violent enough to nearly flip a full-loaded bus, robberies, blowouts on sharp curves, passengers collapsing mid-journey, 20 years of unpredictable road life, but none of it, not a single one of those moments, prepared me for what happened on that October night in 2022 on the route from São Paulo to Foz do Iguaçu. It was a Tuesday, October 19th. I remember the date precisely because it was my oldest daughter's birthday and I had made her a promise. I would call from every single stop along the way. The journey was a long one, 12 hours non-stop, departing from the Tietê terminal in São Paulo at 8 p.m. and arriving in Foz do Iguaçu at 8 the following morning. I had run that route around 50 times in my life. I knew every curve, every speed bump, every rest stop by heart. The bus was nearly full, 42 passengers in a 45-seat vehicle. Most were workers heading home after jobs in the city, a handful of tourists making their way to see the Iguaçu Falls. Ordinary people, ordinary families, nothing out of the ordinary. We departed the terminal on the dot at 8 p.m. São Paulo traffic was as brutal as always. It took us nearly a full hour just to clear the city and reach the actual highway, the BR-277, the road that cuts straight through the entire state of Paraná before meeting the border with Paraguay and Argentina. A well-maintained road, one I genuinely enjoyed driving. By around 9:30 p.m., we were finally in open road territory. Light traffic, clear skies packed with stars. The temperature was just right, perfect conditions for a smooth ride. I had shifted into that autopilot mode experienced drivers know so well. Body on automatic, hands on the wheel, eyes locked to the pavement, mind present but at ease. That was when I noticed the bathroom indicator light, that small red lamp mounted above the lavatory door at the back of the bus. Occupied. Someone had gone to use the restroom. Nothing unusual about that on a long trip. I didn't think twice. 10 minutes passed, the red light was still on. Another 10 minutes, still red. I started thinking maybe someone was feeling sick, motion sickness, stomach trouble. It happens, completely normal. But those onboard bathrooms are tiny, suffocating little metal closets. Nobody lingers in there by choice. 25 minutes, then 30. The light never changed. I was getting genuinely concerned. I glanced into the overhead interior mirror, the wide-angle one that shows the full length of the bus aisle. Every passenger was visible. Most were asleep. A few were scrolling through their phones. Others were staring out at the dark countryside passing by. Everybody accounted for. Everybody in their seats. Nobody standing. Nobody in the aisle. So who was in the bathroom? A cold wave traveled up the length of my spine. I grabbed the PA microphone and spoke. "Good evening, folks. If anyone is using the restroom and needs assistance, please knock on the door and I will pull over immediately. Silence. No response. No sound coming from the back of the bus. Nothing. I radioed the dispatch operator and explained the situation. The red light had been on for over 40 minutes. Every passenger was visibly seated. The dispatcher told me to wait until the next stop and physically check the restroom, probably just a faulty indicator light. The next stop was 50 kilometers ahead. I kept driving. The minutes stretched out like taffy. I kept checking the mirror, then the road, then the mirror again. The red light glowed at the back of the bus like a single unblinking eye watching me. When we finally reached the fuel stop, I turned on the cabin lights and announced the 15-minute break. Passengers shuffled off, slow and drowsy, rubbing their necks and groaning about sore backs. I counted them one by one as they filed out. 42. All of them. The bus was completely empty. I walked down the aisle to the rear, red light still burning. I knocked, 3 hard, deliberate knocks. "Hello, is anyone in there? Are you all right?" Silence. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I unclipped the emergency key from my belt. Every bus carries one. It overrides the interior lock, even when the latch is thrown from inside. My hand was trembling. I don't know why, but it was. I inserted the key, turned it. A click. The lock disengaged. I pushed the door open slowly. The bathroom was completely empty. No one inside. The ventilation fan was spinning. The light was on. The flush mechanism was intact, but there was absolutely no one there. I stepped inside the cramped metal space, barely room to turn around, and checked every inch of it. Behind the door, below the tiny sink. There is nowhere to hide in a bus bathroom. It is a sealed box. Yet the lock had been thrown from the inside. That meant someone had bolted it shut and then simply vanished. That's when I saw the mirror. The small rectangular mirror above the sink. It was completely fogged up, like someone had just stepped out of a hot shower, but the bathroom was cold, ice cold. There was no logical reason for that mirror to be fogged. I moved closer. The condensation wasn't random. It had been written on. Deliberately, fingers had drawn letters through the vapor. The message read, "The next curve is mine." I read it twice, 3 times. The next curve is mine. What did that mean? Whose? I burst out of the bathroom, walked fast back to my seat, gripped the wheel with both hands and called dispatch again. I told them everything. The empty bathroom, the locked door, the fogged mirror, the message. The dispatcher went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Roberto, you're exhausted. Condensation forms." Naturally, in bathrooms. The message was probably left by some other passenger on a previous leg. "Drink some coffee. You've got 8 hours left. You can do this." I hung up. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing it. Passengers reboarded. I counted again. 42. All present. I shut the door, fired up the engine, and pulled back onto the BR-277. The highway stretched ahead in the darkness, silent, empty, and very long. I checked the bathroom indicator. Green. Light off. Empty. I breathed. Out. Electrical glitch, I told myself. The message was old. I convinced myself of that, almost. For the next 2 hours, everything was normal. Passengers dozing, the low hum of the engine, the highway rolling under us in that dark, meditative blur you get on long overnight runs. I was nearly calm again. Then I looked at the mirror. The bathroom light was red again, occupied. I hadn't seen anyone stand up, hadn't seen anyone walk down the aisle. Every single passenger was still in their seat. All 42 of them. I checked the GPS. 10 kilometers ahead, a sharp left-hand curve, hazard signs, posted speed reduction, designated dangerous curve. The next curve is mine. Those words came crashing back. Whose curve? What did it mean? I dropped the speedometer from 110 to 90, then to 80. My grip on the wheel tightened as the kilometers counted down. 8, 7, 6. The warning sign came into view. Dangerous curve ahead. Reduce speed. I slowed to 60, then 50. I entered the curve with total control. Deliberate, careful. That's when the bathroom door exploded open. A crash of metal against the partition wall. I looked into the mirror. The door was wide open, the bathroom dark inside, and then I saw it. A shadow, a dark figure stepping out of the bathroom and moving slowly up the aisle toward me. Not running, drifting. A human silhouette with no face, no features, just a solid black shape against the dim cabin light. It stopped in the middle of the bus. Every passenger around. It was still asleep. No one stirred. Only I could see it through the mirror. The figure raised one arm. Slowly. It pointed forward, toward the windshield, toward the road. And at that exact moment I saw it. A semi-truck coming directly at us in my lane. High beams blazing, wrong side of the road, barreling toward a head-on collision. I didn't think. Pure instinct. I yanked the wheel hard right, felt the rear tires drag through loose gravel on the shoulder, heard the screech of the chassis, and the collective gasp of 42 passengers jolted awake. The bus shuddered, fish-tailed, and finally stopped, tilted but upright on the shoulder. The truck blew past us, horns screaming, headlights blinding. It had been in our lane. A direct frontal collision at highway speed that would have killed everyone on board. Passengers were shouting, crying, asking what happened. I sat there with both hands locked to the wheel, lungs barely working. I looked back into the mirror. Bathroom door closed, light off, green. No shadow, no figure, nothing. As if it had never been. We arrived in Foz do Iguaçu at 8 a.m. As passengers stepped off, they thanked me, said I had fast reflexes, said I had saved their lives. I just nodded. It wasn't my reflexes. It was the shadow, the figure that came out of that bathroom and pointed at what I couldn't yet see. Before leaving, I went back to the bathroom one last time. The mirror was clean, no fog, no message. But sitting on the edge of the tiny sink was a small object. A medal, a St. Anthony medallion, the patron saint of travelers, old, rusted. On the back, a name was engraved, Marcelo Silva Santos, 1998-2019. Back at the terminal, I asked around. An older dispatcher, near retirement, recognized the name immediately. Marcelo had been a young driver with the company, 21 years old. He was killed in 2019. Head-on collision with a truck that crossed into his lane. At a curve. On the BR 277. He died instantly, along with 12 passengers. It was the same curve, the very curve where the message had been written. The next curve is mine. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Marcelo had been trying to stop me from meeting the same fate he had. The shadow in the aisle was him, trapped in the bus where he died, spending eternity trying to protect other drivers from the curve that took his life. I carry that medallion with me every single shift, in my pocket, every run, and every time I pass that curve on the BR 277, I ease off the gas, scan the shoulder, and say a quiet thank you to Marcelo for saving 42 lives that night, including mine. 3 years later, the bathroom light has never stayed on like that again. I've never seen the shadow again. But I know he's there, watching, guarding that curve. The curve that took his life but will never take another. Not as long as Marcelo is still out there on the road. My name is Marcos. I'm 52 years old, and I've been a bus driver for 28 years. For most of that time, I've been running routes through the interior of Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte to Governador Valadares, Valadares to Teófilo Otoni, those small towns scattered along the Rio Doce Valley. I've met so many passengers over the years that I genuinely couldn't give you a number. Workers heading home, students commuting to college, elderly folks visiting relatives. every kind of person you can imagine. But there is one passenger I will never stop thinking about. A man who stepped onto my bus on a March night in 2024 and completely rewired my understanding of life and death. It was a Thursday, March 14th, the last departure of the evening, leaving Belo Horizonte at 10 p.m., headed for Governador Valadares, a 6-hour run, scheduled arrival at 4 in the morning. A route I'd done thousands of times. That night the bus was unusually sparse, maybe 8 passengers in total, spread out across the seats, most of them already half asleep before we'd even cleared the terminal. A Thursday in the middle of the month tends to be quiet. The city traffic moved well, and within 30 minutes we were on the BR 381, the highway connecting BH to the Rio Doce Valley, well lit at first, then progressively darker as the city fell away behind us. Low music on the radio, old-school sertanejo, the quiet hum of the engine. Peaceful. That's when I spotted the stop sign, an old, rust-streaked post with a faded marker that read, Parada São Sebastião das Águas Claras. A small community, barely a village, really. The kind of place where you rarely see anyone waiting. But there was someone there that night. An elderly man. He looked to be in his mid to late 70s, perhaps even older. Gaunt, slightly stooped. He wore a plain beige pair of trousers, a white button-down shirt, a straw hat, and carried a small, old-fashioned leather satchel in one hand, the kind that doctors or traveling salesmen used to carry decades ago. I slowed down and opened the door. He climbed aboard, slowly, one step at a time, gripping the handrail and pulling himself up with effort. "Good evening," I said. "Good evening, driver," he replied, a low, raspy voice weathered by age and years. "Where are you heading, sir?" "Governador Valadares, visiting my family." "Your fare, please." He opened the leather satchel and pulled out a piece of paper. He held it out to me. I took it, and in that instant, I felt something was wrong, deeply wrong. The paper was ancient, yellowed, brittle, nearly disintegrating at the edges, the kind of document that's been sitting undisturbed in a drawer for 40 years. It smelled of mold and time. It was a bus ticket, printed in carbon on the letterhead of Viação São Sebastião, a company I had never heard of. And then I looked at the date. March 14th, 1984, 40 years ago, same month, same day, different century. I looked up at him. He was watching me with calm, patient eyes. "Sir, this ticket is very old. It's from 1984. He nodded slowly. "I know, but today is March 14th, 1984. I'm certain of it." A chill moved through me, the complete conviction in his voice. He wasn't confused or disoriented. He genuinely believed it. The ticket listed his name, Sebastião Alves da Silva. Age, 42. Purpose of travel, urgent family visit. If he had been 42 in 1984, he would be 82 today. And looking at him, that estimate fit. But what followed made no sense at all. I let him board anyway. Something inside me simply said, "This man needs to take this trip." He walked slowly down the aisle, passing the other sleeping passengers as though they were furniture, and settled into the last row of seats by the window. He placed his satchel on his lap and turned to face the dark window. I returned to driving, but my mind couldn't settle. A 40-year-old ticket, a man who believed it was still 1984. What was happening on my bus? 20 minutes passed, then 30. I checked the mirror. Sebastião had changed, not subtly, visibly. The deep lines of his face had softened. His posture had straightened. His hair was no longer all white. I blinked. I shook my head. I looked again. I wasn't imagining it. He was younger, not by a few years, by a decade at least. The man who had boarded my bus at perhaps 82 now looked like he was in his late 60s, and as I continued to watch, carefully, discreetly, the process continued. Every time I glanced back in the mirror, Sebastião had regressed further. 60, 55, 50, the wrinkles disappearing, the hair darkening, the skin smoothing, the body filling out with the vitality of middle age. He sat straighter, no longer needing the window to lean against. By the 1 hour mark of the trip, the man in the back row looked to be in his mid-40s, healthy, strong, fully alive. I was gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. What I was seeing could not be happening, and yet it was happening right there, 30 meters behind me, 40 years old, 35, 30, 25, a young man in the back of my bus, looking out the window with bright, wide eyes, 20 years old, then 15, a teenager, 10, a child, 5, a toddler sitting alone in the wide seat, the leather satchel now comically large beside him, and then a baby, a tiny infant in the back row, the enormous adult seat around it like a cradle. And then silence. I looked in the mirror. The seat was empty. No one there, no infant, no child, no old man, only the leather satchel sitting on the floor. I pulled over, turned on the hazard lights, walked down the aisle. The seat was genuinely empty. I picked up the satchel. Inside, small, neatly folded baby clothes, and a photograph. Old, black and white, a family portrait. Father, mother, an infant in her arms. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, Sebastião, 6 months, 1942, and beneath that, a yellowed newspaper clipping from March 1984. The headline, "Serious Accident on BR-381 Kills 5. Among the victims, Sebastião Alves da Silva, 42, traveling to Governador Valadares to visit gravely ill family member. The bus never reached its destination." 40 years ago, on this exact date, Sebastião had died on this highway. He had never made it to say goodbye to his family. He had died in transit, mid-journey, with his destination still ahead of him. And tonight, 40 years to the day, he came back. He used the same ticket. He sat in the back. He tried to complete the trip that death had interrupted. But as the kilometers passed, time reversed. Inside him, rolling backward, unwinding his entire life from old age to infancy, until he reached zero and simply ceased to exist again. He dissolved back into whatever place the unfinished dead go. I arrived in Governador Valadares at 4 a.m. and went looking for the Silva family. I found a woman in her 70s at the address I traced. Sebastião's surviving sister. When I showed her the satchel, she broke down completely. It was his, the satchel he'd been carrying when he was killed. It had never been recovered. It had simply disappeared from the wreckage. Now it was here, in my hands, 40 years later. She told me that their mother had been dying when Sebastião got on that bus. He never arrived. Their mother died 2 days later without seeing him, without saying goodbye. Her last wish was unfulfilled. I drove back to Belo Horizonte in complete silence. No music, just the dark road and my thoughts. I still drive that same route. Every time I pass the São Sebastião das Águas Claras, stop on a night run, I look over. I scan the shelter. I've never seen him again. I think that coming back, even if only to dissolve, was enough. Enough to finally rest, enough to finally let go of a journey that had been unfinished for 4 decades. My name is Paulo. I'm 38 years old, and I've been driving buses for 12 years, mostly through the Serra Gaúcha, from Caxias do Sul down to Porto Alegre, through Gramado and Canela, those mountain routes with their endless curves and their thick, suffocating winter fog. In July, when the temperatures drop near zero and the low-lying clouds come in dense and white, the locals call it O Russo, the Russian. A fog so heavy and complete that 2 meters of visibility is a luxury. It blankets everything. It makes every curve a gamble. It makes the familiar strange. It was July 16th, 2021. A Friday, bone cold all day, fine rain since early morning. By the time night fell, O Russo had descended in full force over the mountain range. I was running the last service of the day, Gramado at 9 p.m., destination Porto Alegre, 2.5 hours in normal conditions. With that fog, I was looking at 4. The bus was lightly loaded, 15 or 16 passengers, mostly tourists heading home after a long weekend in Gramado, plus a handful of locals who made this commute regularly. We pulled out of Gramado on time. Inside the first few minutes, I already knew the descent would be brutal. Once we hit the descent from the escarpment, the fog became a solid white wall. I was crawling at 20 kilometers an hour with low beams, fog lights and hazard signals all running at once. The limpiador de parabrisa swept across the glass in a steady, anxious rhythm, clearing the condensation that kept forming. The passengers were quiet, most asleep, some staring into the luminous white nothing outside. The road was mine, just the fog and the curves and the sound of the engine working hard. Then I heard footsteps, coming from the rear of the bus. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the rubber floor, tack, 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 moving toward the front. I checked the mirror. The cabin lighting was off to preserve my forward visibility, so the back half of the bus was in near darkness. I could make out the shapes of seated passengers, but nothing more. The footsteps stopped somewhere in the middle of the aisle. I waited. No one sat down, no one spoke. Then the footsteps resumed, heading back to the rear this time, followed by a low, incoherent murmuring, like someone talking to themselves or to someone else, but none of the passengers responded. None of them even stirred. I switched on the cabin lights, fast, and there he was, a man standing in the middle of the aisle, tall, thin, dressed in a uniform I had never seen in active service. Grey trousers, white dress shirt, black vest, a clip-on bow tie, and a company cap with an emblem I didn't recognize. An old uniform, decades old, the style of a ticket inspector from another era. He was bent slightly over one of the seats, as if checking a passenger's ticket. I called out, "Excuse me, who are you? What are you doing?" He didn't respond. He didn't turn around. He just stayed there, hunched over the seat. Then he straightened. He turned, slowly, like a frame-by-frame rotation. And when his face came into view, I saw that there was no face. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Smooth, pale skin pulled flat like a mannequin, like a wax. Sculpture that had never been given features, a blank surface, empty. I hit the brakes instinctively. The bus lurched. Passengers were thrown awake, shouting in confusion and alarm. I looked again at the aisle. The faceless man raised one arm and pointed forward, at the windshield, at the road. And then he spoke in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground. "Watch out for oil on the road." I blinked. He was gone. Absolutely gone. The passengers were staring at me. I told them I'd swerved because I thought I saw an animal in the fog. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Watch out for oil on the road. Those words were now the only thing I could hear inside my skull as I drove the next 5 minutes, slow, heart still hammering, down toward the next curve, a curve I had taken hundreds of times, and there it was. A massive, dark slick of oil spread across the asphalt, right in the belly of the curve, glistening under my headlights. Enormous, unavoidable at normal speed. If I had been going 60 or 70 kilometers per hour, we would have spun out, gone through the guardrail, and dropped off the mountain. Because I was already crawling due to the warning, I stopped the bus with meters to spare. I called highway patrol. They dispatched a crew. The cleanup took nearly an hour. When the road was clear and we could finally move again, I didn't say anything to the passengers about the faceless man. How could I? I told them it had been a fuel spill from a passing truck. They nodded. Some thanked me for stopping in time. I just kept driving. We arrived in Porto Alegre at 2 a.m., 4 hours after departure. Everyone got home alive. The next day I went to the company's archive. I found a photograph from 1972, 50 years earlier, an inaugural run photo. The crew, driver, ticket inspector, and the first passengers on the Gramado-Porto Alegre line. The inspector in the photo was wearing a grey uniform, black vest, white shirt, and a company cap. The caption, "Inaugural Run, July 15, 1972. Driver Antonio Silva. Inspector Mario Costa." I found a newspaper notice from August 1972, 1 month after the photo. Fatal accident on Serra Gaucha Highway. 3 lives lost. Among the victims, Mario Costa, 34, bus inspector. Cause, oil spill on road surface. Bus lost traction on curve. Mario died trying to shield passengers. Mario Costa died on a curve because of oil on the road. 50 years before the night I saw him. And now he comes back whenever that same danger appears on the same stretch of highway. He walks the aisle. He checks the passengers as he once checked tickets. And when the moment is right, he points forward and says what no one else can say. Watch out for the oil. He doesn't rest. He doesn't disappear into peace. He stays on the road doing his job, protecting the people he couldn't protect the night he died. Today, 3 years later, I still drive that route every week. And every time I descend into the fog, into Orusso, I listen for the footsteps, for the murmur, for the warning voice that comes from far below the surface of the living world. Because I know Mario is still out there, still working, still watching the road. My name is Jose. I'm 49 years old. I've been driving buses for 25 years, most of that time running routes through the interior of Bahia and the backlands of Pernambuco, the Sertão. Unpaved roads, choking dust, the kind of sun that hits the asphalt like a judgment, and stories that nobody believes when you tell them, but that happened anyway, that keep happening. The story I'm about to share still gives me goosebumps every time I pass the place where it unfolded, and I pass it every week. It was December 2023, the holiday period, Christmas approaching, the Sertão buzzing with that particular energy of people making the long journey home to their villages. I was running the Petrolina to Juazeiro route, crossing the São Francisco River by bridge, cutting through the dry, thorny Caatinga scrubland. Only a couple of hours, but a meaningful trip for the people aboard. Tuesday, December 19th, 6 days before Christmas. The bus was packed, luggage racks stuffed with gifts and boxes, 40-degree heat, the kind that dries your throat in 2 minutes. We departed Petrolina at 3 in the afternoon and made good time for the first hour. At the town of Taparoa, I pulled over for a scheduled 5-minute stop to pick up additional passengers and drop some cargo into the luggage compartment. Few people climbed aboard. One of them drew my attention immediately, a thin man, skin dark and deep brown by years under the Sertão sun, wearing simple rural clothes and carrying a heavy old leather bag, cracked, patched, and visibly weighty. He asked to stow it in the luggage bay himself. Most passengers let the driver handle that. Not him. I stepped aside and watched as he opened the bay, pushed the bag deep into the far corner, almost out of sight, then closed the panel and climbed up, without a word. 20 minutes down the road, I heard something from beneath the bus, rhythmic thumping, like a loose bag bouncing against the metal walls of the compartment. Normal enough. Then it changed. The thumping gave way to something else. Muffled crying, the thin, high sound of a small child weeping from somewhere underneath the floorboards. I pulled over immediately. I opened the luggage compartment and went in, crouching through the heat. Everything was in order. Bags strapped, nothing loose, except the old leather bag in the corner. The crying was coming from inside it. The padlock broke with one strike of a tire iron. I opened the bag. There was no child inside. There was a doll, a cloth doll, handmade, old and frayed and stained at the seams, button eyes, a sewn mouth, yellow yarn hair coming loose, and the doll was crying, real tears. I watched them form at the edges of those button eyes and roll down the fabric face, dripping onto my hands. I touched the doll. It was warm, far too warm for a stuffed toy, warm like a living thing, and it was heavy in a way that cotton and cloth should not be heavy. I stood there in that roasting luggage bay, holding a weeping cloth doll. I brought the bag out and found the thin man. I pulled him aside, away from the other passengers. "There's a doll in your bag," I said. "It's crying." He didn't look surprised. He looked terrified and relieved. He sat down on the running board of the bus and told me everything. The doll had belonged to his daughter, Maria. She had died 3 years earlier at age 5, a disease and not enough money and time to treat it. She died in his arms, clutching that doll, her only toy, the thing she loved most. After Maria passed, the doll began to cry at night, every night, real tears, as if Maria's soul had stayed behind, trapped inside the only object she had ever truly loved. He was taking the doll to the cemetery in Huazero, where Maria was buried. He was going to bury it with her, lay the doll in the soil beside her grave, so that his daughter's soul could finally leave, so that Maria could stop crying and go. I listened to him finish. I looked at the doll in his hands. The tears were still coming. "I'll take you there," I said. "I'll take you both." He grabbed my hand and wept. I put the bag back in the compartment, gently this time, and we drove the rest of the route without music. Only the engine, only the road. When we reached Huazero, I drove directly to the cemetery before the terminal. The man stepped off, took the bag and nodded once. "Do you want me to wait?" I asked. He shook his head. "I need to be alone with her." I pulled forward and paused at the gate. In the mirror I saw him, kneeling before a small low grave marker, a child's grave. He held the doll on his lap. Both of them were crying, father and doll, their tears indistinguishable, their grief the same. A week later, I ran the same route again and stopped in Taparoa. I found the man in the town square. I had to ask. He smiled when he saw me, and it was the first time I had ever seen him smile. "I buried the doll," he said. "Right when I laid it down in the earth beside her, the crying stopped. Immediately. Just silence. And I felt her go. I felt Maria leave." He paused. "She's at peace now." I drove back to Petrolina, thinking about all of it, about how many journeys the living take and how many more the dead must take, about how many times a driver moves more than just bodies from one place to another. Sometimes we carry grief, sometimes we carry unfinished goodbyes, sometimes, if we're paying attention and we're not afraid to stop and listen, we carry souls to the place they finally need to be. I still drive that same route today. I still stop at Taparoa every single time, and every time I open the luggage compartment at the end of a run, I pause for just a second before I reach inside. Because after everything I've seen out on these roads, I've learned that what's in a bag isn't always what it looks like, that what travels with us isn't always visible, that the road carries more than distance. It carries stories and souls, and the weight of things left unfinished. These are the stories no one puts in the travel brochures. These are the passengers no one counts at the terminal, but they're real, every single one of them. If this video got under your skin, if one of these stories made you glance over your shoulder or think twice about the next long-haul trip you take, then hit like right now. Share this with someone brave enough to watch it alone at night. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it, because we're just getting started. There are more roads, more nights, more stories from the drivers who've seen what shouldn't exist and lived to tell it. I'll see you in the next one.